Fort Cornwallis, located adjacent to the Esplanade, is Malaysia's oldest and largest fort. Completed in 1810 by the British to protect Penang Island, the fort marks the spot where Captain Francis Light, the founder of Penang Island, first landed in 1786. It is now one of the most famous landmarks in Georgetown. A statue inside the fort. Fort Cornwallis opens between 0900 and 2200 hours daily. Admission fees are as follows. Foreigners, adults room 20, children, room 10, Malaysians, adults room 10, children, room 5. The original Fort Cornwallis was built at the spot where Light first landed on Penang Island in 1786. It was initially built using nibong palms. It was gradually rebuilt with bricks into the fort we see today. Several cannons were brought into the fort, such as the historical Siri Rambai cannon. Fort Cornwallis is bounded by Light Street to its south, Jalan Tun Side Shebarakbal to the east and to the north, and the Esplanade to the west. Fort Cornwallis marked the spot where Captain Francis Light first landed on July 17, 1786. 2 weeks later, after clearing the surrounding jungles, he constructed a simple stockade, made of nibong palms, a species of palm native to Penang Island. It was built to protect Penang Island from pirates and foreign powers, including the Sultanate of Kedah, from which Light gained the island. The fort was named in honor of Charles Marquis Cornwallis, the then Governor-General of Bengal, who had lost to George Washington in the 1781 Battle of Yorktown during the American Revolutionary War. This defeat had led to the recognition of United States independence. Coincidentally, Penang Island, then known as the Prince of Wales Island, was the first British settlement founded since the loss of the 13 American colonies. In 1789, 3 years after the simple stockade was completed, Light began rebuilding the fort using bricks. The new design, which features a star-shaped fort, was similar with other British forts. In India, Indian convict laborers were brought in for the construction of the brick fort. It was completed in 1793 at a cost of $67,000, Spanish dollar. In 1797, Colonel Wellesley, who would later gain fame as the Duke of Wellington by defeating Napoleon Bonaparte, reported that the location of Fort Cornwallis, at the tip of the promontory where Georgetown stands, rendered it useless to defend the Prince of Wales Island. This sparked an argument of whether Fort Cornwallis and, by extension, Georgetown should be shifted. After the Prince of Wales Island was made a presidency of India in 1805, the British authorities looked for ways to improve the island's defenses. At the time, the Napoleonic Wars, started by the then French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, was at its height, making it imperative for the British to defend the island against French threats. The British considered abandoning Georgetown in favor of a proposed settlement of Jamestown, to be built at what is now Bayan Baru. A new fort was to be built on Jirjak Island opposite Jamestown. Even though the British authorities formed a separate revenue farm for Jamestown, the proposed relocation was eventually scrapped, as the residents of Georgetown found it too expensive to move. Therefore, Fort Cornwallis was repaired and rebuilt between 1804 and 1810. Land was reclaimed to the east of the fort for the construction of a semicircular battery facing the sea. This eastern battery, where Jalan Tun Side Shebarakbal now runs, has since been eroded into the sea. Even though the British authorities formed a separate revenue farm for Jamestown, the proposed relocation was eventually scrapped, as the residents of Georgetown found it too expensive to move. Therefore, Fort Cornwallis was repaired and rebuilt between 1804 and 1810. Land was reclaimed to the east of the fort for the construction of a semicircular battery facing the sea. This eastern battery, where Georgetown side ship Harga now runs, has since been eroded into the sea. Nevertheless, Fort Cornwallis was completed in 1810 at a cost of $80,000 Penang dollar, an enormous amount at the time. Fort Cornwallis also witnessed the birth of Malaysia's modern legal system, when in 1808, the Supreme Court of Penang was sited within the fort. The Supreme Court has since been shifted to its present premises at nearby Light Street. By 1814, 77 cannons were installed along the brick walls of Fort Cornwallis, with a further 45 in reserve. Today, only 17 remain, the most famous being the Seri Rambai cannon. This Dutch-made cannon was given to the Sultan of Johor in 1606. Portuguese forces seized it in 1613 and took it to Java, where it remained until 1795. The cannon was then given to Aceh, before being moved again to Kuala Selangor. It was eventually seized by the British in 1871. Since then, it stays at the northwestern corner of Fort Cornwallis. The Fort Cornwallis Lighthouse was added at the northeastern corner of Fort Cornwallis in 1882. An adjacent flagstaff was installed to signal the arrival of mail ships to other flagstaff on Penang Hill, as well as to receive signals from Penang Hill every time the governor and other dignitaries descended from the hill. Along with the lighthouse, 2 roads were laid along the eastern and northern sides of the fort: Fort Road and the Esplanade. Both roads were renamed Georgetown Side Ship Harga in the 1970s.